cloud. And so I just want to again say welcome everyone to this webinar on the spotted lanternfly. It is my privilege to introduce you to Dr. Emily Altoff. She is our state specialist when it comes to urban entomology. She does have a little bit of a passion when it comes to gardening and insects with gardening. That's where I'd like to say her passion is, at least to me, it seems that way. She does also work a little bit with Lincoln University as well as MU Extension. So she's got two universities that she's working with. She's been around for about a year and a half, and she has just jumped straight in with helping us with understanding bugs and insects. And I happen to call her, as well as two other of our faculty, I call them the bug ladies. And I like to think that they see that as a compliment there. So remember, again, turn off your microphones. Turn off your cameras if they're on. If you ask a question, please, by all means, put your name there. So if we can, we'll try to answer your question with an email later if we don't get it to this webinar. So Emily, thank you for being here. We greatly appreciate it. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. And thank you all for having me today. I so appreciate being able to share about this insect with you all. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to double check. All right, so today, as you all know, we're going to talk about the spotted lanternfly. And before we get started, I wanted to do some really quick housekeeping. Like Debbie mentioned, I'm going to ask for some audience participation today. The reason that I do that is because I used to teach in a more traditional classroom setting, and so I like to ask questions and make sure folks are really engaging with the material that we're talking about. So if you see this icon as we move through, I'll be asking you to put your thoughts and feedback into the chat. That way I can make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all kind of tracking with the information. It also helps me know what I need to explain and what you already know as master gardeners. So overall today, we're going to talk about what is spotted lanternfly. Why do we care about spotted lanternfly? Why are we all here talking about this insect in particular? Where is spotted lanternfly now? What's its life cycle? What does it eat? Why is it a pest? And how do we manage for it once it gets here? And what are we doing right now in Missouri to prevent it from being here? So first off, what is the spotted lanternfly? The spotted lanternfly falls into this group called Hemiptera. These are our true bugs. Insects within this group have piercing, sucking mouthparts. They use their mouthparts similarly to a straw. And so they suck up the phloem or the xylem from the plant, and that's how they feed on food. And they're in this family that you may not be familiar with. You may have never heard of this family before. You would be in very good company if you hadn't. The family is called Phlegoridae. The reason that you probably have never heard of this family of insects before is because this is the only insect within this family that is a pest here in the US. It's the only one. And now this insect is a serious invasive pest, and it feeds on over 70 plant species, and it can cause damage. The other thing that it does that's a problem, which we'll get into later in the talk, is it excretes something called honeydew. This honeydew is a very sugary excrement, and ultimately that can cause sooty mold. So those are some of the reason, or that is some information about what this is. And you might have even seen spotted lanternfly talked about on television. It's been a huge problem out on the East Coast, and as entomologists, we get very excited whenever there is any insect mentioned in mass media or in popular culture. And so I would be remiss if I did not mention this during our talk. The spotted lanternfly has even shown up on SNL as of recently. So ultimately, we care about this particular pest because it has a wide host range. It's a known crop pest. It can be a hitchhiker, so it can lay its eggs on lots of different materials. And it's well adapted for the climate here in the US. It can also be a nuisance pest for homeowners. So it's not just a problem within our cropping systems or within our forests. It can also get into people's houses. And a lot of times we don't want large masses of insects in our homes. You can kind of think of our multicolored Asian lady beetles that we're going to see very shortly as the weather gets cooler. And this it would be a much larger version of that within your home. I wanted to kick off really quickly with what is an invasive species? What makes a species an invasive species, and what makes an insect a pest? So if you could put in the chat really quickly, what makes an insect a pest? That would be wonderful. So what makes you consider an insect a pest? And I'll give it a couple of minutes just for people to think a little bit. Non-native. So sometimes, yep, sometimes it damages plants. It eats things you don't want it to, yep. Hard to control, sometimes annoying. They can sometimes cause problems and damage things. Absolutely. Unwanted, or it competes with native species. These are all really great thoughts here. This is excellent. It could be evasive or bothersome. Absolutely. All right, so y'all are on a good track here. So, an invasive species here is a non-native organism, and it can cause or likely causes harm to the environment, economy, or human health. And here I just have some examples of species that you probably are familiar with, especially if you're a gardener. You're probably familiar with our Japanese beetles that we have here in Missouri, probably familiar with our brown marmorated stink bugs now. Those were brand new when I was doing my master's here years and years ago. And you're also probably familiar with emerald ash borer. But how did these invasive species get here? Do you all have any ideas on what potential pathways these invasive species might be utilizing to arrive here? How might they be getting to places we don't want them? Imported goods, absolutely, that is great. Yep, imported, traveled with imports, fruits and food, on plant material, yep, that's a pretty common one as well. Interstates, yep, packaging. Excellent. So we are all on a good trajectory here too. Fruit and plant transport, cargo ships. Yeah. So these can happen through intentional introductions. Oh, something here got, I don't know why this says soil health, but that's a different issue. Um, so it can be through biological control. Maybe originally we intentionally brought something in. One of the common plants here can be, or common organisms here that we think of is the cane toad. It was originally introduced into certain regions as a biological control agent, but now it's a huge pest problem. Something could be brought in for soil health. One of my students is studying management of an invasive plant that we originally thought would help with erosion in the early 1900s and has since taken off and is a huge problem. They can be accidentally introduced, like what you all were talking about in the chat with those accidental introductions through trade or transit. And they can also spread naturally through range expansion or variation in climatically suitable habitat. This can happen if an insect, for example, used to freeze over winter in a certain region, but is now able to acclimate to the weather there. So we had a lot of really good thoughts in the chat. So now that we understand the concept of invasives and we understand what we're looking at here in the broader lens, what about spotted lanternfly? This particular insect was imported from Asia, likely on stone, and its original introduction was in 2014 in Pennsylvania. This is a problem, obviously, because once it was introduced, it has expanded rapidly in range. It was imported on stone because the insects can lay their eggs on many different materials, not just on a particular plant or on a particular tree or anything of that nature. They can lay their eggs on sheet metal. And so I like to say that they can lay eggs on planes, trains, and automobiles, which makes their spread really difficult to control. So speaking of their spread, where is it now? So after its original introduction about a little over 10 years ago in Pennsylvania, It has spread rapidly over the East Coast and is starting to make its way towards the Midwest. Right now, our closest populations are in Tennessee and Illinois, but we are actively looking for this insect within the state of Missouri as well. So when we're looking for this insect, what are we looking for? Let's talk about how this insect develops and one of the greater challenges with identifying this insect here in the state, and that is how different it looks at different stages of its life cycle. So at the top here, you can see the eggs, which are present from September to June. Then they will hatch and go through their instars. Instars are portions of the insect's life cycle where it is a nymph, so it doesn't yet have wings, but it's going through these developmental shifts still. It grows and then it will shed its skin and then begin a new instar. And that instar is those moments between molts. So it's a certain developmental stage. And so the first instar, they're really small, and this occurs from about May to June. They get a little bit bigger in their second instar from June to July, and even bigger in their third from June to July as well. So these life cycles or these life stages are occurring around the same time. And then they start to look quite different when they hit their fourth instar around July to September. They get this red coloration with white and black dots. And throughout this nymphal stage, they are able to jump. They are not able to fly, but they can jump pretty well. From July to December, they become adults, and that's when they have these really distinct wing colorations and patterns. They start to lay their eggs from September to November, so right about now. And then those adults will die, and then the cycle starts again, and they have one generation per year. So at least we're lucky in that regard. I'll go through all of those life cycle stages individually in just a moment, but I wanted to clarify what you should do if you spot any one of these life stages. You should immediately take a photo and, if you can, collect the specimen. Once you've done that, immediately notify the Missouri Department of Agriculture or Missouri Department of Conservation. When you notify them, it's critical to include the date and location of the observation and try to make sure that you have as clear of a photo as possible. This helps people to ensure that the spotted lanternfly is what you saw, and it also helps them to get a better idea of the context in which you might have found the insect. The other thing that I'll make sure to state here is be prepared to answer some follow-up questions. Those follow-up questions aren't going to be upset with you because you found the insect. They just might ask questions like, where was the insect? What was the insect doing? What might it have been feeding on? What could it have been near? And so they'll want to ask those follow-up questions, so just be prepared and responsive when those questions start to come in. So we'll start here at the egg stage. And there's a couple of different ways that these eggs can appear. The first is on the left where we have this uncovered egg mass. So this is what the eggs would look like with no covering on top of them. Sometimes the female will add a cover to the eggs. A partially covered egg mass is what's the next to the right. And then we have a full covered egg mass. And then once they've hatched, you can start to see these circles on the tops of them where the insect would have emerged. And here on this white background, this is really, really easy to see. So I'm going to give us a little bit of a challenge on our next slide. Can anybody in the chat tell me where the insect egg mass is here in this image? This is where we level up a little bit. It gets a little harder. Gonna give it just a little bit longer. Good. Y'all are experts at spotting the lanternfly. You didn't tell me that. This is awesome. Good work. So yes, it's right in the center. But you can see how if you were walking through the woods, you might miss something like that if you weren't looking for it in particular. So it's critical when we're looking to have a really discerning eye and be thorough with our investigations. So the insect doesn't stay as nymphs or as eggs forever. They obviously emerge from those eggs, and eventually we have our early nymph stage, those black and white, almost reverse Dalmatian insects. These will emerge in the spring, and these will normally feed on new plant growth, especially stems and foliage. So that might be where you would find this particular group in the spring. So that would be where to keep an eye out. Then we have our late nymphs. These are around from June to August and are strong jumpers. And here they've kind of taken a 180 in their appearance. They are red with black and white spots. And so, as you can see, this looks quite different from its earlier instars and also looks quite different from the adult stages. So it's important to know that they can vary in appearance a bit. So now we have our adults. These are those ones that are out from about June to December, and they have an abdomen that's concealed by its wings. The abdomen itself is actually a little bit, is quite short compared to other insects that you might see. And this one can fly as it has those fully developed wings and has bright red hind wings. So while you might not see that bright red from the side as well, you can really see it when they expand their wings and start flying. There's a few common lookalikes for our spotted lanternfly, though. And so I wanted to give us an opportunity here to spot the difference. Yes, I agree. They are really pretty. It is a total shame that they're invasive. Um, but I wanted to provide an opportunity here to identify which of these options might be our lanternfly. So if you go across the top from left to right, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. And at the bottom, we'll do 5, 6, 7, 8. And just put in the chat which one you think is the lanternfly. And this one might be a little bit tricky because there's some of these that, even though they're gorgeous, um, might look a little bit similar. Okay, y'all are on top of it. This is awesome. Yes, number 3 is our lanternfly. And this one was a little bit tricky even. It had its wings closed. And so this is excellent. We have pro spotted lanternfly identifiers within our group. But it is important to know these identifying characteristics. And really quickly, number 5 is a type of moth. It looks beautiful, but and I understand why it would be easily confused. That's why I put it on here. So good work. We all identified number 3 as the lanternfly. So those key features are going to be the piercing mouth parts, the red underwings, the wing patterning, and sort of holding their wings as if they're a tent. So now we know what they are, but what are they eating and why is this a problem? So the first plant that they really like to eat is Tree of Heaven, which is an invasive plant. So you would think to yourself, that should be just fine. But then we get to other plants that are their hosts, such as fruits like apples, crabtree or crabapple, cherry, grapes, and stone fruits. I'm going to emphasize here the grape component. They really like grapes, which is a huge problem because we're in Missouri, where we've got a big wine industry. They'll also feed on our hardwoods like maple, poplar, and black walnut. They also sometimes eat butternut, which is a problem as many locations are trying to reintroduce butternut. They can also be seasonal in their host preference. This is something that we're just starting to really understand about this insect. Like I said earlier, this insect falls into the family Fulgoridae. And as a family that's understudied because there aren't very many pests in this group, um, we're still learning a lot about their behavior and biology. And this was a relatively recent discovery within the 2020s where there was a seasonality of host plants. So some of them might be really good hosts for the insects in May and June. Others might be better hosts later in the season, or they might be found more commonly on those plants later in the season. In the chat, can anybody tell me what 2 plants we might be really interested in looking at if we are scouting for spotted lanternfly? Where do we really think we should look for this insect? Good. Yes. On grape and tree of heaven. So, very good. Excellent. So, what is tree of heaven? Tree of heaven is an invasive tree. It's commonly called Ilianthus, and it was first introduced in the 1700s. So it's a very early arriver for an invasive species. So it's been here for a long time. We've been coexisting with this plant for a very long time. It has prolific root sprouting and it has kind of a foul odor. So if it has such a foul odor, why does spotted lanternfly like it? Um, so they have the same original range. This particular plant isn't necessarily required for spotted lanternflies' survival. How it can feed on other plants, but spotted lanternfly that feed on it typically lay more eggs than those that feed on something else. So it could be benefiting their health in that way. They're also really big pests of grapes. It's a huge pest because they're swarm feeders, as you can see in this top image from University of Maryland and this bottom image from Holly Sugart. There are many adults that are feeding on these vines, and obviously that is going to be a problem for a number of reasons. The first of which is a loss of winter hardiness. It can also cause reduced bloom, reduced crop, and even vine death. One other component at work here is that sooty mold can make crops unmarketable. So when that sooty mold is covering our plants, it can prevent photosynthesis from occurring, but it can also make the fruit really gross. If there's mold all over your fruit, you're not going to want to eat it. It's not going to be very appetizing to you. And so that can also be a concern here as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about sooty mold shortly. It's also an issue for black walnut. You might think those are pretty hardy trees, but in the numbers that we're seeing them on many trees out east, such as this particular tree, you can see is completely covered by spotted lanternfly, it becomes an issue. Black walnut is able to support their development to adulthood, so they can feed on it their whole life cycle. It's not as commonly a host as tree of heaven is, and normally the damage is localized to the branch of the tree, or if it's a sapling, that's when the tree's really going to be in some trouble. So I promised I'd talk about sooty mold, and here we're going to talk about it a little bit. So spotted lanternfly are again in that group called Hemiptera. They have those straw-like mouth parts where they are feeding on all of the sugar in a plant. And they intake their nutrients and then they absorb some of those nutrients. And then there's some other things that go on here too. So let's break this down. So I want you to imagine that this U shape is the midgut of the insect. They ingest the nutrients towards the beginning of their digestive system. Many times they're looking for nitrogen sources within the plant. That's the nutrient that they're most after. And then once they feed on the nitrogen, they absorb that nitrogen. It goes into the body. But as you all know, when they are essentially drinking their plant smoothie, it is not all nitrogen. There's a lot of sugar in there. And so hemipterans have something that's a little bit unique. They have something called a filter chamber. And so instead of going through their full digestive tract, the sugar in the water goes through something called a filter chamber, where it can go from the front to the back of the digestive system and be processed more efficiently. And then those nutrients are excreted just as they are. This causes the insect to produce something called honeydew. This is that really sugary stuff that a lot of times we see come from our aphids. If you've ever seen ants tending to aphids, this is what they're feeding on. They're feeding on that sugary substance that the aphids are producing. So that's why in return they'll protect those aphids and kind of see the aphids almost like cows, producing nutrients for them. So they'll take care of the aphids. However, here we have much, much larger insects producing comparable amounts of honeydew to their body size. So as you can imagine, this becomes a very sticky situation. Apologies for my pun. And so this is an additional way that the insects cause harm to our plants. Here, we're seeing sooty mold on the left. While the insect itself doesn't produce sooty mold, when you have this much sugar all over a plant, it begins to be a problem, and that's what's being produced here. This grows on our honeydew, the sooty mold. The other issue with this super sugary excrement and sooty molds combined is that it brings in other insects that we don't really normally want in our urban areas. Most people don't want yellow jackets or other stinging insects really close to their home, and this can increase the likelihood of that happening. So it's a problem on multiple levels. It also prevents, as you can imagine, if you're this leaf right here in the middle that is covered in sooty mold, your ability to absorb sunlight and thus go through the process of photosynthesis is it greatly decreases once you're covered in sooty mold. So it prevents the plant from taking up additional nutrients in that way as well. Over here on the right, we can see oozing sap from the feeding sites. Here, these are areas that the insect has been feeding on that are now oozing sap, which is also a bit unseemly in our urban environments as well. So this is another potential harm to plants that this could result in. So overall, here in Missouri, we're really concerned that the economic impacts could be felt by our forest product industries, so those hardwood trees, our grape and wine industry. Here in Missouri, we really like our grape and wine industry. Potential tourism that could go hand in hand with our outdoor opportunities as well as our grape and wine industry. Potential impacts for shipping companies if we have to put out quarantines. Potential issues for nurseries if those saplings are going to be at risk. Additionally, this could be an issue for specialty crops if they're getting covered in sooty mold. Folks have a pretty low tolerance for damage on some of those specialty crops. So, what are we doing to stop the spread here in Missouri? So, the Missouri Department of Ag has been really, really wonderful in their attempts to prevent this insect from arriving here within the state. They've been doing visual surveys each year of tree of heaven, where those are really abundant. Areas of high travel, so areas where we might expect to see invasive insects come into the state, they've been scouting there as well. Um, and they have actually identified a few different introductions within the state over the last 4 years. Those introductions were stopped by our colleagues there, which is wonderful. And luckily, each of those introductions were on shipping containers, and the insects had died in transit. So we are very lucky, and we are very lucky so far that we have caught that all 4 times that we know of. They also check, so this is what doing a survey typically looks like here on the right of the screen, is looking through our tree of heaven stands, looking for spotted lanternfly, and doing visual scouting. It can also look like educating our folks who work in shipping and making sure they know what this insect looks like when they are traveling from state to state. Many of the introductions that we've caught over the last 2 years have come in from the East Coast. And so that's why it's important to continue this educational effort with those that work in shipping and transport. So now we've talked about, now we all know what spotted lanternfly is. We all know where it is right now. We know what its life cycle looks like. We've got an idea of what it's feeding on. And now we know what we're doing here in Missouri to stop it from getting here. However, despite our best efforts, it's highly probable that this insect will be introduced within the next few years, at least somewhere, just due to its ability to lay those eggs on planes, trains, and automobiles, and its ultimate spreading capacity. Also, the suitability of the climate here in Missouri makes it, unfortunately, a really great place for this insect to arrive, although we don't feel the same way about it. So I want to talk through management strategies for once this does occur. The first is cultural control practices. So here, the best thing that we can do is we can, first of all, promote plant health, and we can also remove spotted lanternfly hosts. don't assume all damage to a tree is necessarily from spotted lanternfly. That more so applies if there's a large population within the area. So the first thing we can do here is remove Tree of Heaven, or you can use it as a trap tree. I'll get into what a trap tree is momentarily. But what do you do after you remove Tree of Heaven? Well, the best thing you can do is promote plant health, and you can think of it like boosting a plant's immune system. So, similar to how you might take a vitamin, promoting the plant's health within your garden or within your home um, can function similarly. It makes sure that it has the energy to defend itself against potential herbivores or pathogens. So, a trap tree in this regard would work something like this, where here you might remove all of the other tree of heaven. So that's what this X shape here is on these trees right here. And then you might apply systemic pesticide just on this last tree. Or it can look like you remove it and then you allow all of the insects to come to the tree and then you hit it with pesticide very hard. So it's an opportunity to use that attractancy to Tree of Heaven to manage for the insect. All right, our physical or mechanical control. So here we're pretty familiar with some of these mechanisms, I anticipate. Here this is scraping, smashing the eggs, using tree traps, swatting, stomping, nymphs and adults. So again, here I wanted to give us an idea for what this might look like at different times. Um, you might be always looking for spotted lanternfly throughout the year. We're really going to focus on, I will get to that question. That is a great question. We will scrape and destroy eggs. Mostly you're just not going to look for the eggs over the summer. The rest of the year they could be anywhere. And so when we are removing these insects, you're going to scrape off the egg mass and you are going to smash it. You can also put it in a bag, especially towards the beginning of an infestation. We'll want to know about it. If you see spotted lanternfly, please email Missouri Department of Ag. This is their email address. I'm going to leave this up for just a minute for folks to make sure they know who to contact if you see spotted lanternfly. I'll leave that up for just a second longer. And that is plantpest@mda.mo.gov. And they should be fairly responsive to this. They're wonderful. They've been doing a really good job with monitoring for the insect. All right. So the other way that we can remove it that you might have heard me say, in addition to smash, stomp, scrape, is using caging traps. This is going to be more of a problem once the insect is at higher population levels. In the chat, could anyone hypothesize with me, why is the caging necessary around this trap? Why did we put this here? Why would we not just have the sticky trap on the tree? Mhm. Ooh, so other critters don't eat them. Oh, my internet connection's unstable. Okay. To keep other animals, birds, etc. away from the trap, so other animals don't get stuck. Excellent. So this has been a problem, especially when we're putting these on the tree. Yep, to protect the tree. So the sticky trap is more so to protect the tree here from the insects as they crawl upwards. They frequently will start at the bottom of the tree and then crawl up and down. Um, the caging prevents other organisms from also getting stuck to the sticky trap, specifically birds or bats or other small mammals, because that's not fun for the small animal and it's also not fun for the person who has to collect the trap. So the next thing I want to talk about is biological control. I want to make it clear that we are not yet at a place with research where we are implementing many of these biological control practices. But I just wanted to highlight for you all some of the ongoing research that's happening with spotted lanternfly biocontrol, and just really emphasize that we have not forgotten about biological control in this system. We are just actively trying to catch up with this insect. So here, I just wanted to have folks put in the chat really quick, what is biocontrol? What is biological control? Using nature against nature. Natural controls, IPM. So it's definitely a part of IPM, absolutely. Using natural controls. Using plants and insects to control pests. Great. So the standard definition here is going to be the use of living organisms to suppress pest populations. These can be predators, they can be parasitoids, they can be competitors. Um, and many of you have probably seen some of these in your gardens. I know I talked to some folks at the Tomato Fest this year who had seen our tomato hornworm, our beloved garden pest. I am just kidding. Um, but what you might really enjoy seeing in your garden is the parasitoid that builds its cocoons on these hornworms. So we're going to talk about a similar concept, but with spotted lanternfly. So there are a few labs on the East Coast right now that are really digging in to biocontrol for spotted lanternfly. The first of which is a lab at Cornell University that is studying a fungi or Bavaria strain that feeds on spotted lanternfly. And they've seen some effectiveness with this. They're just still working to figure out some of the nuance behind applications. So you can see that here on the left, that insect completely covered in Bavaria. Here on the top right, you might see a tiny wasp on the wing of the spotted lanternfly. This is a parasitic wasp. It's normally a parasitoid of the spongy moth, but they're seeing, although it's a low rate of parasitization, an amount of parasitization by this insect that's already been introduced as biocontrol for another organism. And finally, we're working on something, and by we, I mean other scientists on the East Coast are investigating classical biological control. What I mean by classical biological control is when you go to the original range of the pest and you investigate organisms that are pests of the insect there. And so they are seeing some success with biocontrol agents from that region. But again, there's still a lot that we are learning before releasing any sort of insects within our ecosystem. And so you can kind of see that these are egg parasitoids. And you can see on the very far right, top corner of that picture at the far right, these little holes within the egg masses, and those are from the parasitoid. I just think this is really cool. This is ongoing work, so we don't necessarily have full answers here yet, but I am really excited to see what comes out of this, and I'm also excited I get to go to the Entomological Society of America meeting in 2 weeks and talk to some of the folks that are actively pursuing this work. So another method you can use some of those lower toxicity options. If you do eventually have an issue with this pest, I don't foresee this happening for a number of years, but I should probably knock on wood and hope that that holds true. Here, those are going to be your insecticidal soaps, horticultural oil, neem, botanical oils, things that have lower residual activity. And even with these reduced toxicity options, it's really important to make sure you're reading the label and applying these safely. Finally, there are some insecticides that are registered to utilize. However, there's a few things I really want to highlight here. Number one, if you are using any pesticide or insecticide, always read the label. I know I said that for the last one. This one is also important. Here, it's really important to make sure that you read that label thoroughly and understand not only the potential impacts on yourself, but also the environment. If something could be a problem for your pollinators, it'll say so within your um, environmental effects in the label. It can also be really important to make sure that you're not applying this when other plants might be flowering and when those pollinators might be going towards the plant you might be looking to apply this on. So ultimately, if you see this insect, it's critical to smash it. Um, Maybe get a photo of it first, send an image to Missouri Department of Agriculture. Remember the email that I put up earlier in the chat, and you smash it. I was laughing about this a few years ago because my mom went on a bike trip. She was biking out in West Virginia, and she sent me a photo of what she said was the coolest bug she had ever seen. She was like, "This is the weirdest looking bug." And I said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to tell you to smash that. That is an invasive species, and we do not want it here. It is going to harm many of our native plants that we want to retain in our um, ecosystem and within our specialty crops." So I'm getting towards the end of my portion of the talk, and then I want to make sure I save some time for questions. But I wanted to just quickly do a summary and make sure that we understood all of these points before we have some question time. So, can anyone give me a really brief description of what is spotted lanternfly? Can we put it in the chat? What is this bug? An invasive insect. Yes, it is a bug. Yes, it is a bug. It's a true bug and it has those piercing, sucking mouth parts. Yep, it's kind of like a sapsucker. It is an invasive insect, which is beautiful. Yes, all of these are very true. All right, so why do we care about it? Why is this important? It's in the Phlegoridae family. Absolutely, yes. Yes, it's invasive. It can damage our crops and plants. Damages our crops. Yeah. Don't want it here. We do not want it to spread. Absolutely. Good. Okay. So now where is it? Where do where do we know that it is? Pennsylvania. Yep, that's where it was originally introduced. Illinois and Tennessee are the closest. Yep. As close as Illinois. It's in West Virginia. Yep. East Coast. Yep. All right, excellent. So in spotted lanternfly's life cycle, does it always look the same? Or are we looking for the same thing throughout its life cycle? No. Looks different at each stage. Yes. I'll get to that question in just a sec. So what does it eat? Where might we see this lanternfly if we're looking for it out? Tree of Heaven. Yep. Tree of Heaven. Grapes. Maybe on some apples. Grapes. Yep. Black walnut. Absolutely. Yep, yep, yep. So what are some things what is the first thing that you should do if you see spotted lanternfly? What do I want you to do if you see this? Smash it, but what should we do before? Photograph then smash. Who are we sending the photo to? Who do we send the picture to? MDC or MDA? Yep, exactly. Good. Good, 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 good. Excellent. Yes, thank you, Maggie. Yes, plantpest at mda.mo.gov. Yes. Smash the varmint. Yes. Okay, what information might they need when you email them? So we've got our photo, location, and date. Yes. Yes. The where, when, what. Yes, exactly. Good. Good. This is good. All right. So y'all were paying attention, which I am thrilled about. I know that it's 6:50, and I appreciate your attention throughout. So thank you all for being here. I know I saw two questions in here that I wanted to make sure I answered. The first, I believe, and I apologize if I misspell any or mispronounce anyone's name because I'm just reading it. Um, I believe Sadia asked, does the systemic pesticide for SLF affect other native and beneficial insects? This is why it's going to be really, really important for us to read our labels and make sure that it's not listed within those potential environmental impacts. So I can't necessarily speak across the board, but I would just recommend being cognizant of what may be listed within the label. Okay, I saw another one in the chat. I saw one, I don't remember who asked it, but I saw someone ask if they had any native predators. This is a question that we're really investigating right now. This is another one of those that we just don't quite know very much about yet. Since it's an invasive species, it might not yet, oop, it might not yet have had predators that have caught up to it. So we're just not quite sure yet. I wish I had a better answer for that. Da, 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 da. How large does the adult get? So the adult gets about, if you put your thumb to your pointer finger and make a circle, that's about how big the adults get. So they're much larger than a lot of our other plant hoppers that we see. And so that's one of the reasons that it's really important that we look out for them because they're pretty large. And as you can imagine, an insect about that size is gonna leave a lot of honeydew on your plants. Heard that it eats milkweed, which can poison it. That I am honestly not sure off the top of my head. I would have to do some additional research. But Debbie, if you could connect myself and Maggie later, I can look into this milkweed question myself and I can investigate. Thank you. Yes, I agree. That is a very large insect. And I messed up tonight. I have earrings with their wings on them and I should have worn them tonight, so I apologize for that one. That's one of the things that some of the artists out on the East Coast have been doing. They're like, okay, these are really pretty insects. I kind of feel bad killing them. What can we do with these organisms? So they're not particularly picky eaters. I've seen them on lots of different crops, although I'm not necessarily sure on specifics off the top of my head. Um, I think this might be an area that we're also kind of growing in our understanding of. The high quality photo of the life cycle, the best two sources for those resources are going to be through Cornell University and through Penn State Extension. The reason that those two are going to be some of the best resources is because they've had the insect the longest. Penn State has been on this for over 10 years. Um, I don't have a link for that artist. That was actually the graduate students at Penn State University. But I'm sure you could email the graduate students there and get in contact to see if they would sell them externally as well. Um, do they always lay their eggs on tree bark? No. So that is actually the problem. They don't always lay their eggs on tree bark. They are not picky about where they are going to oviposit their eggs. They will lay their eggs on just about anything, which is why it's a huge problem for trade. Um, and anyone that is traveling. So they can lay their eggs on steel, and that's why I say huge problem for planes, trains, and automobiles, because they could technically lay their eggs on any of those materials. These are great questions. Yeah, and so Debbie also put in the chat that there is a really good story about spotted lanternfly on PBS, and she has the link to that within the chat as well.
So Emily, I've heard that there's over 70 plus plants or
Yes.
crops that this insect kind of favors, which is what my question was in asking about gardening plants, which are the
Yes.
garden crops and flowers, because the master gardeners work in that arena. I know the master naturalists, they go into the woods and
Yeah.
some of the other locations as well. So do you have kind of a list anywhere of kind of like the categories of the things that they would eat? I know it's like if you ask me if I want a steak or ice cream, I'm going to say ice cream. So
Hmm.
that would be lower on the totem pole for the vast majority of people, I understand. So is there a listing of something along in that line?
I can look into that and I can get that information to you all. Again, that's one of those things that we're kind of figuring out as we go right now, but I can eat over 70 different types of plants. That is correct. Right now within Missouri, I don't anticipate us seeing damage on some of those other 70 quite yet. Well, not at all right now, hopefully, since it's not been reported within the state. Um, but likely the first heavy hitters are going to be grape and black walnut and tree of heaven. As those populations establish, it'll start to have some of that spill over onto our other gardening crops. So I can get you that list tomorrow if that's okay, Debbie.
That'll work. And what I'll do is I'll take that, I'll look again for that life cycle. I know you had sent me that, we had looked that up, and I'll try to get that as well on that publication, as well as when the recording is available. And I'll send that out as an email to all the registrants.
Perfect. And then if anyone else has questions, I've got my email address here as well. Oop. Feel free to reach out with any questions or any follow-up that you might have. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Yeah, they're everywhere on the East Coast. It's really a lot.
I'm Emily for this evening for your presentation. There's some nice comments for you in the chat box. I hope you get an opportunity to read those. And I haven't been to the East Coast in a while. I do plan on going there soon, and I will definitely be on the hunt. Thank you for teaching us how to be good spotters, and we appreciate your time this evening. And for
Yeah,
those
thank
of
you all
you
for having
online,
me.
look for another email. Give me anywhere between a couple days and a week, and I'll be sending that out to you. So thank you, everyone. And thanks again, Emily.
Thank you.